WikiLeaks, the internet and free speech. Since releasing controversial U.S. diplomatic cables, the whistleblowing website has found itself dropped by popular domain name systems and under threat from the Australian and American governments. This sparking a new debate about freedom of speech online. Who controls the flow of information on the internet? Who sets the rules and under what terms? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Fuli Batibo. WikiLeaks and its founder Julian Assange continue to be under fire. About a week ago, Assange turned himself to British authorities. He is wanted in Sweden for a sex crimes investigation. Meanwhile, Australia and the US are considering legal action against Assange and his website that has released several confidential US diplomatic cables, making it more difficult to function. The site can no longer be accessed via the popular domain name wikileaks.com. In addition, Visa, MasterCard and PayPal have blocked donations to the site. Assange has labeled these companies instruments of U.S. foreign policy. WikiLeaks supporters called for hacking the sites of such companies. They tried organizing the attacks with the help of Facebook, which promptly took down the page. Facebook says it violates the terms of service, which prohibit material inciting illegal acts. But they haven't removed WikiLeaks' own Facebook pages, which brings us to the issue of policing online content. Well, to discuss this, joining us from London are Barry Fox, Internet Security and Technology Analyst, and from Oxford, Professor Bill Dutton, Director of the Oxford Internet Institute and Professor of Internet Studies at Oxford University. Thank you both for talking to us, gentlemen. Let me start with you, Professor Dutton, if I may. The debate over the ethics of releasing these diplomatic cables has certainly, as we said, reignited the debate over free speech on the internet and also concerns about the powers that private companies have online. Do you think that free speech can be protected on a private sphere like the internet?
Well, I think, first of all, I think you have to separate two issues. One is security of information, and I think there was a security breach within the U.S. government. A young intelligence analyst leaked these files. WikiLeaks did not release these files. So when WikiLeaks had possession of these files, as did the press and WikiLeaks did what they could to redact some files, and actually WikiLeaks involved the press, I think, because they wanted help and support in going through these files, redacting some files, and making them available to the public. So I think WikiLeaks basically performed a press function, not a breach of security.
So not a breach of security, you say. Barry Fox, who exactly is it then, that's defending freedom of speech on the internet when you see WikiLeaks being dropped by the main domain sites, being dropped by Visa, MasterCards? Who defends free speech on the internet?
Well, the internet is about free speech. The internet is virtually unpoliceable because it is a global phenomenon. It's a global publication, and you have never had world law, a single law which applies to all countries, especially when it's going, a lot of the communication is going up and out to space by satellites. Mm-hmm. So you can't, in the long run, you can't police the internet unless you happen to be running a state which is a repressive state.
But there are certain rules out there. There are certain rules out there. Who sets these rules? Who decides what's allowed and what's not allowed?
Well, they're commercial rules. I mean, if you talk in country state, well, then China sets the rules for what it wants done in China, and Thailand as well at the moment, and Malaysia. They set the rules for what goes on inside those countries, and they block sites. If you're talking the global situation, there are no rules that are enforceable in any court of law, because you don't have a court of law which covers the whole of the globe. What the rules are, commercial rules, and that's what we are seeing now with some of the companies, the giant companies like Amazon, PayPal, saying no, we won't help WikiLeaks. That is a commercial pressure. It's a commercial
But don't
law.
you think there might
And
have been
I
some
think,
political pressure as well?
oh, I'm sure there is. Behind the scenes, I'm sure there's an immense amount of political pressure because, as Professor Dutton was saying, really, if you want to find a culprit here, the culprit is the US government lacks security. And I don't aim that particularly just at the US government. Government security in most countries is appallingly lax because half of the people dealing with secure information don't know the first thing about security. And we have it in Britain. People working for the Ministry of Defence regularly leave their laptops and cell phones in pubs. They have a few drinks and they leave them there with the information open for anyone to see in a cell phone with all private numbers in it. The government, the US government, has goofed badly, as have other governments, in letting this material float around and leave the front door. It doesn't matter who took it out the front door. It shouldn't have been able to get out the front door. So they're just deflecting the blame.
Professor Dutton, you'd like to jump in, perhaps?
Yes, I totally agree that this focus on security should be the focus, not freedom of expression. But I do want to contest this view that somehow freedom of expression globally is a Wild West with no rules. And clearly, every nation has many rules that impinge on freedom of expression: liability law, privacy, copyright, many other, and security, for example. So I think the important issue is not to panic about an event like this and ensure that security is repaired so that an insider cannot do what was done in this instance, and to make sure that overreaction to security or other violations, privacy and so forth, don't impinge too seriously on freedom of expression. It's a major balancing act. I take the point that global coordination on this is difficult, but I do think that there are many laws. In fact, I think if there's any trend at all, the trend has been over the last 10 years for more and more restrictions on freedom of expression.
And you know, Professor Dutton, some would say that WikiLeaks, by posting these cables, didn't do anything illegal, because from what I understand, the files that were posted were actually technically not stolen, but rather copied from government computers. And when it comes to copy material, you're shifting into intellectual property right law rather than criminal law. Does intellectual property law apply to government material as well?
No, I think actually, a lot of people paid a lot more than I am are sorting through to see if there is any violation of law by WikiLeaks itself. But clearly this was an insider within the U.S. Army that from what we know, leaked this information. Now, the same information that came into the hands of WikiLeaks is in the hands of the press, and the press are helping and collaborating with WikiLeaks in very positive ways to ensure that the public gets access to these diplomatic files and the previous information that was distributed. So I do not see how they are doing anything that the press has not done. There may be some degree of difference in redacting of files, but WikiLeaks involved the press to help them, support them on redacting some files.
And certainly it seems that most of the witch hunt anyway globally has been directed towards WikiLeaks and not necessarily the newspapers that publish information as well, such as The Guardian or the New York Times. But what I want to come back to the issue of free speech. And the United States in the past has praised the internet as a tool for making governments more accountable. Earlier this year, when the Chinese authorities were allegedly carrying out cyber attacks to control online content, the U.S. Secretary of State Hillary Clinton condemned the move. Then she spoke strongly in favor of promoting internet freedom. Let's take a listen.
Countries that restrict free access to information or violate the basic rights of internet users risk walling themselves off from the progress of the next century.
Now that the U.S. is under the spotlight, however, there seems to be a change of tone.
The United States strongly condemns the illegal disclosure of classified information It puts people's lives in danger, threatens our national security, and undermines our efforts to work with other countries to solve shared problems.
Barry Fox in London. So on the one hand, the U.S. is promoting internet freedom, but they don't like it when their classified information is posted online for everyone to see. Should a different rule apply to democracies on the internet in terms of protecting their national interests, do you think?
Well, I mean, the Freedom of Information Act, people wanted that act, and then they decided, well, perhaps we don't want it because information about me, a politician, has been released. I mean, these things are all two-edged swords. And again, we have to bear in mind, it was America, it was the USA, and Al Gore and President Clinton who opened up the internet. I mean, let's just remind ourselves where the internet came from. It was a military tool. It was a communications network designed to withstand nuclear attack, so that if you dropped a bomb on one part of the communications system, the signals would end up going round the world through the back door. That was a military, and then it became an educational establishment tool, and it was, as I say, Clinton and Gore who opened it up for the superhighway as a communications tool. Now, they created this monster, and we're all now trying to work out how to live with this monster. For instance, the internet has virtually destroyed a lot of the magazine print publishing world. It's not viable anymore because people will always take something for free if it's available for free. We are now used to getting information for free, and WikiLeaks has now made us used and accustomed to getting classified information for free, and there's no going back. You can't uninvent the atom bomb, and effectively the internet in its current form is the modern equivalent of the atom bomb.
Professor Dutton, do you agree with that? Do you agree that there is no going back?
Well, no. Well, first of all, the internet is not, we have not created a monster. We have created a source of accountability that I think would be, in the 18th century, creating the press. In this century, the internet is as important as the press was in the 18th and or later centuries. It's an independent source of accountability, as it provides individual citizens and organizations an independent source of information which they can hold the press, government, public intellectuals, and business accountable. So it's absolutely a new source of freedom of expression in liberal democratic societies. I think, but it's fragile. I mean, we have seen in some countries the internet actually eliminated, in terms of access to the internet eliminated at times, in Myanmar, Burma, for example.
In countries like China, where you've had efforts to see the internet shut down, I mean, is the pressure that the U.S. applying any different from what's been happening in China or the Middle East?
Yeah, different strokes in different countries. I mean, everybody's trying to come to terms with this new, I mean, whether you call it a tool or a bomb or whatever, I mean, whether a monster or a good monster or a bad monster, we've got it. I mean, I look back 10 years ago, my life has changed unbelievably because of the internet. I'm sure everybody now, their lives have changed. There is no going back. Each country is now trying to come to terms with how to control it or leave it uncontrolled. I mean, we see it with, you know, the sex trade, with paedophilia, I mean, all these, the nasty side, the dark underside of this. And the US government sees WikiLeaks as the dark underside, the enemy, because, as we've said, unfortunately, WikiLeaks has exposed the gaping holes in US security. But I think there is another aspect here which I think is worth bearing in mind. What we're seeing now is the beginning of something quite different, and that is cyber war. And we have talked about cyber war for a very long time, or for what seems like a long time, actually, a couple of years, where people are hacking into established sites to destroy them. And we've now got, for the first time, the supporters of WikiLeaks attacking the people they see as the villains, the Amazon, the eBays, the PayPals, whatever, the major sites. We've seen now WikiLeaks itself being brought down.
All right, well, let's, if I could just interrupt you for a second, let's bring in our guest from New Delhi, Pavan Duggal. He's a cyber law expert. We've been talking about the issue of free speech on the internet, and, you know, everyone's been saying it's self-regulated and, you know, that there needs to be some sort of mechanism in place. What kind of organization in your offer could step up and offer standards of protection online?
See, first and foremost, we have to appreciate that there is not any single international treaty where nations have agreed on issues pertaining to protection of online speech. At best, we only have the Convention on Cybercrime of the Council of Europe, but that's on a very limited aspect pertaining to cyber crimes. I think it's time for internationally the dialogue to happen, and in international common acceptance of basic uniform principles which affect, shall I say, protection of online speech. But currently, at the time when I'm talking with you, there's no such phenomenon happening anyway. In any case, WikiLeaks has once again demonstrated that this is a great wake-up call. It's a watershed. It's a landmark in the history of the internet. And more importantly, it's got the entire legal regimes of entire countries of the world napping. No legal regime was prepared to deal with the challenges the way the legal challenges have been thrown up by WikiLeaks. And I think we really need to learn from this incident and go forward, and we need to make a very distinctive yet delicate balance between the protection of online speech and the protection of sovereign interests of nations.
Indeed. And let's talk about Facebook more specifically, because Facebook left WikiLeaks' page up on their website. Do you think Facebook understands the notion of free speech more so than the others?
I think the very fact that they put the page up was an indication of their commitment to online speech. But having said that, you have to see the complete things in a holistic perspective. Most of the stakeholders are confused on what kind of a definitive step they need to be taking. With these so-called acts which have been described as the beginning of cyber war, I think it's high time for nations to realize that cyber war is no longer within the prelude or within the privileged communication of nations. Today, legal entities on the internet, web presence like WikiLeaks, can be the foundation or the beginning of any kind of a cyber war attack, as we have seen. So I think a lot of work has to be done, and currently there are no direct answers yet on how this can proceed. But 50 years from now, when we would be looking back and analyzing the history of the internet, clearly we would realize that WikiLeaks would have changed the way internet and cyberspace and the jurisprudence around it developed.
All right. Well, I just want to come back to the issue of Facebook, because we've been talking about Facebook a lot lately. They apparently have what they call a hate and harassment team, some sort of virtual police that is charged with taking down content that's illegal or that violates their terms of agreement. You know, who do you think these people are, and what interests do they serve, Professor Dutton?
I don't know how Facebook is internally regulating. I think there is a call for, I think one of the most sensible approaches I've heard to regulation of speech is for the internet community itself to try to self-police more in terms of pointing out issues they have with particular material online. But I think in a community like Facebook, which is a relatively closed community, although it's huge, they do face issues of appropriate information, and they're dealing with this every day. And I think that's industry and individuals working through issues of what is appropriate to be online. But I just must say that this is not, we're not in a cyber war. It is not a time to have a panic about WikiLeaks. I think we're just shocked that with the pace of change. I mean, if you compare this to 1971 when Daniel Ellsberg released the Pentagon Papers to the New York Times. Daniel Ellsberg sat at a copy machine and copied page by page the Pentagon Papers to send them to the New York Times. Here you have, 400,000 or more files released in, as a matter of a few pushes of a button on a compact disc, so that it's just the scale is shocking to us. It is not that new. An insider security breach is not new. The government press getting a hold of information that was classified at one time but is now public is not new.
Right.
And WikiLeaks should not be demified on this.
Bill Fox, do you agree with that? The Professor Dutton there thinks that we're perhaps blowing this out of proportion and that we're not in a cyber war. What do you say to that?
Well, I say we're seeing the first signs of what cyber war will be like, because it isn't just going to be waged by one country against another. It will be individuals can wage cyber war, and we've been seeing this with the way that individuals have been getting together, downloading the software that is needed for what's called a denial of service attack. And a denial of service attack is where you, me, and several tens of thousands of other people all flood a website with requests for information at the same time. And we bring that site, at least temporarily, to its knees because it's flooded, it can't cope. And what is happening, we're seeing this, people are downloading the software voluntarily because they feel angry that, for instance, Amazon dumped WikiLeaks. So they want to vent their spleen on Amazon. So they get the software and they attack Amazon. But more sinister, and what I mean by cyber war, is that if people do not have good virus protection on their computers, when they are going to what they think are perfectly innocent websites or opening what they think are innocent emails, their computers can become infected and become what are then referred to as botnets, which are zombie computers. Your computer, my computer,
right,
if we're not careful, can become a zombie, and it can be programmed to attack and flood the likes of Amazon or the Pentagon or the US or an airline with information. This is what I mean by we're seeing the beginning of cyber war.
All right, let me just interrupt you and ask our guest in New Delhi, Pavan Duggal, if there are any other mechanisms outside of the United States. We're seeing perhaps America and Facebook policing the internet there. What kind of virtual police exists in other countries, if any?
I think most of the countries outside the US are still by and large relying upon their national legislations so as to do some kind of censorship or policing. For example, in India, we have recently amended the Information Technology Act 2000, and these amendments, which have come into force from last year, have bring in huge powers of monitoring, interception and blocking to the government. So it's these kind of powers that sovereign nations are beginning to utilize in the event of so-called disaster management or in the event of policing online speech. But clearly, these are still primitive setups. These setups have not yet evolved. There are no definitive mechanisms nor any legal, shall I say, binding or foundation nature for law to support these kind of mechanisms. What I really see is that WikiLeaks is going to now get started a process of international dialogue. We do have a 24/7 G8 networks point of contact, but then these are more specifically limited to cybercrime. I think it's time that nations need to get together, more so in this part of the world where a large portion of the internet users and mobile internet users are existing, on how to deal with these issues pertaining to protection of online speech and where to draw the line and where is the territory where the governments can come in and start policing.
Well, it'll certainly be interesting to see what further implications this controversy has on the future of the internet. Well, we're going to have to to leave it there. Thank you so much for joining us on this edition of Inside Story. In London, Barry Fox. In Oxford, Professor Bill Dutton. And in New Delhi, Pavan Duggal. Of course, we welcome your comments and suggestions as always. Please email them to us at insidestory@aljazeera.net. Thanks for watching.